Episode 85 opens with Hanji and Magath doing recon on the Jaegerist lookouts, with them immediately asking, why haven't they sunk the boat yet? This is one of those things that is just kind of glossed over, but it is actually incredibly important when it comes to the rationale of the rumbling and Parody's continued existence as a whole. In this scene, Hanji knows that the Jaegerists probably doubt they're even alive, and stationing troops here is just a precaution on their part. If something were to go wrong, sinking it would be very easy, pretty much one strike is all it would take, but they clearly still consider the technology to be too valuable for just a preemptive strike. And it's that technology part right there that I think is not talked about nearly enough. One of the primary motivators for Marley's current attack on Parody was technology, mainly planes that could easily wipe out their warriors without ever even engaging them in combat. By capturing the Founding Titan, and in their minds, also the Rumbling, Marley could quickly regain dominance in their region and buy themselves a bit more time before, as Magath described, bombs rained down upon the Earth and the Age of Titans simply came to a close. Evidently, the Jaegerists too are well aware of how powerful and valuable that technology is why this conversation exists in the first place, which yet again brings me back to the fact that the Rumbling is just kinda dumb. One of these days, I'll get around to quantifying the loss of welfare for the population of Parody caused by the Rumbling, since, wiping out 80% of the population tends to put a pretty big dent in technological progress for, well, a few generations or so. But again, a small-scale shock and awe rumbling, followed by the swift rearmament of Parody alongside Hizuru, would almost certainly be more than enough to deter any retaliation from pretty much whoever. Parody would likely fall prey to the resource curse, that being, when a country possesses high-value resources, they often invite external aggression, or more commonly, internal corruption. But look, we've got Hanji and Armin, I trust they would figure out all the things we now know in the real world and would avoid those pitfalls too. They could monopolize the Iceburst Stone and basically hold a kill switch for the island's production. Or, on the complete opposite side of things, they could quickly open up trade routes with the rest of the world and make themselves indispensable in global supply chains. But all of that gets into very dry academic policy talk, most of which will unfortunately fly over all of our heads anyway. If you do want to read up on this in the real world, there are mountains of literature on how countries manage this abundance of resources paradox, or resource trap, or call it whatever, but all of this is very real and not just theoretical. So while the plane in this episode is just this single flashpoint, in the wider state of the world, this technology right here could have played a pivotal role in integrating Parody into the rest of the world. A lot of people talk about this whole idea of, oh, well, the rest of the world still would have invaded Parody, but at the end of the day, if they have the metal to make themselves basically uninvadable, it simply doesn't matter what anyone else thinks or believes. Either you adapt, or some other country will gladly partner with Parody, get their hands on the Iceburst Stone, and on the wheel goes. As for the title of the episode, Traitor, there is the easy interpretation, and there is the usual Attack on Titan, very abstract interpretation. A traitor, by definition, is a relative term. To be a traitor, you must betray something or someone. We will have more literal examples like Daz and Samuel calling Armin and Connie traitors, but we will also have the much bigger question of what it means to betray yourself and what you believe is right. Magath, for example, will reconcile with his past of ignorance, while the rest of the main cast will become traitors to Parody to stop the traitor of humanity that is Eren. Moving into the episode itself, we see their squad formulating a plan, though it quickly becomes clear that they somehow need to pull off what is basically a perfectly synchronized one-shot on all of them all at once. And do note that this is Annie doing the talking, since she is by far the most experienced in infiltration and, well, covert extermination, I guess? And that is exactly what Mikasa talks about next, saying if they do just rush in and kill everyone, Atsumabito will get caught in the middle. This goes back to the difference in Parody's military operations and the Warriors. Because Parody was basically always resource constrained, everything they did was much closer to special ops, and they were trying to maximize damage while minimizing losses and cost. The Warriors, on the other hand, were pretty much just Marley's brute force, and even when they did infiltration, they had no qualms about just going berserk. And so yes, while Annie's approach makes perfect tactical sense, they do need to take all of them out at once, she does have a massive strategic blind spot. Without the Atsumabito mechanics, they don't have a plane, and the entire plan falls apart. And what makes matters even more complicated is Jean saying that they've known them since they were cadets, clearly implying that he doesn't want to kill anyone either. We talked all about Jean's philosophy and worldview last time, so we won't rehash all that again, but TLDR, Jean's morality is largely built on the simple foundation of preserving human life. going against Eren doesn't really change that. He still doesn't want to just start killing people because, oh, we're gonna stop Eren. This too is largely a continuation of what we saw last time. Annie starts pressing them, not because she's feeling spicy and wants to yo-yo some Jaegerists, but because she needs them to have their head in the game. She blatantly asks, okay, so what's the plan? We somehow need to buy enough time for the plane to be launched, while also never killing anyone. Okay, cool, how do we do that? Everyone here knows that it is basically impossible, they just don't want to say it. And so Annie throws in a quite provocative,
"There is a plan, right, Armin? You had one for me."
Now, admittedly, they would settle on a hybrid plan of sorts, and Armin does actually have an idea of how to do this without bloodshed, but we all know how that ended, so I think we'll just stop at it is impossible. Throughout the series, we have talked about the slow but constant erosion of this quote-unquote enemy. The series began with the Titans being the one and only enemy. Soon enough, we learned that the Colossal and Armored were human, and thus, the enemy became human. In Season 3, that line became even more blurry as the fight turned to the Shadow Government. It was no longer just human, it was people right here on the island. But throughout Season 4, they have turned their weapons on each other. Not some mysterious high and mighty king or his private militia. Now, they are forced to fight the same people they practically grew up with. They might have talked about all this last night already, but it's only now that the reality of what's actually happening is hitting them. And so Connie asks, I thought we were saving people, but now we're going to have to murder some of our friends first? First off, note that we punch in on Reiner, because for him, this question is all too familiar. He remembers holding Marco down. He remembers transforming on the wall. He remembers asking himself that same question over and over. The hero of humanity sent to vanquish the island devils. Yet, once he reached the island, they saw that they were all people, and soon they became friends. Yet even so, he kept on, quote-unquote, saving the world. So, just like Connie, he asked himself, what kind of saving the world are we talking about if I constantly have to kill my own friends? But secondly, I also have to stress just how well Isayama walked the line between having this split in morality and just cold reality. Every single character here feels and truly believes that the rumbling is reprehensible and needs to be stopped. But every single one of them also repeatedly and continuously acknowledges the fact that they are safe. The rumbling will ensure their survival and no one else they know will have to give their lives. I often see people parroting this idea of the scouts suddenly heel turning and how that's apparently bad writing when the show constantly shows us that they don't just doubt their decision, they are always teetering on the edge of flipping back. The moment the rumbling began, the squad talked about how all this hate will disappear and that they have won. Just last episode, Jean challenged Hanji directly, saying this will ensure their survival. And now Connie is asking, how will killing their own friends help them? Implicitly, he is saying, to hell with the world, I don't want to kill my friends. At every single step, both before the rumbling started and after, we see the cognitive dissonance of intellectually acknowledging that the rumbling means safety, but also morally acknowledging that this is unforgivable. This is why the episode is called Traitor. It is an insult thrown to Armin and Connie, but it is also something that is perpetually on their own minds as well. They themselves feel like traitors of their own people. Isayama never shied away from the very ugly fact that many people would celebrate the rumbling. He never shied away from having our quote-unquote heroes acknowledge that same fact. The show goes out of its way to show us every single side of this. We see parody civilians who died at Eren's hand and those who condemn him. We see parody civilians who celebrate Eren. And the parody soldiers are split into even smaller groups. Floch knowingly killed his own people through the wine plan. The Jaegerists believe that, as an abstract, the island's safety is all that matters. The MPs were ready to betray the scouts and feed Historia Titan regardless of what anyone wanted. There were never any good or clean outcomes here, because that is life. There is no perfect solution to anything. And so yes, it's very cool to see Connie question this idea of having to kill his own friends to save some abstract. Actually saying it's cool, it's not really cool, it's interesting, but not cool because it's messed up. You get what I mean. But hold up, Isayama keeps cooking because Annie quickly pulls back.
If it had been you in our place, You probably would have chosen differently than we did that day.
I am the same as you. Is that what he was saying?
This is Annie drawing a clear line between her, Reiner, and Eren, and the scouts who oppose him. For years listening to Armin, and now even here, she watches them put so many others before themselves, and she can't help but ask whether there is something worth fighting for. Ever since she was a kid, she's lived on what is basically autopilot. Get strong, destroy everything that stands in your way, and just survive. This is her truly realizing just how desensitized to it all she had become. The world is a cruel place, but it can be beautiful. There are people who don't wish to just take and take. There are kind and selfless people who will help you when you need it the most. If these people, the ones who did just betray their own nation to save the world they don't even know, were in their shoes all those years ago, they wouldn't have destroyed the wall. And the same thing applies to Reiner, only for him, this also marks a symbolic moment of finally stepping over that line for good. This whole season, and really his entire story, has been an identity crisis. From the day he was born, he was considered lesser, and even when he attained the title of an honorary Marleyan, nothing ever changed. He didn't break the wall to just save the world. He did it because he wanted to be a hero and to be respected. And so Annie now drawing this distinction between them sparks the memory of Eren's words, and the realization hits him. Eren was the same as him. He consciously chose to commit the atrocities he committed because he wanted to, not because he truly had to. The rumbling is not about saving Paradis, it is about attaining freedom, just like Reiner never breached the wall to save the world. He did it because he wanted to. This is what his final words meant. It was understanding. Obligatory, yes, Attack on Titan deals with multiple themes at the same time, and Eren was also radicalized into the rumbling. We have talked about this plenty before, so let's not start this again. Yes, Eren wanted to do the rumbling to attain his freedom, but he was also radicalized into doing the rumbling. Both of these things are true at the same time. We have talked about them numerous times, and that's what I believe the whole point of the Founding Titan is.
None of you need to join this battle. You'll have to defend yourself if the Aegis spot you, but for now, just stay out of it.
This is that inescapable burden and guilt bubbling to the surface all over again. He wants to tank the whole thing, to protect them from ever sullying their hands, because maybe then he can be absolved of his own wrongdoings. Naturally, Connie and Johnny then object, because sending in just the two of them to fight for them is just cruel, and so that is where our little emotional bargaining ends. But Hanji then rejoins the conversation, saying time for civilization is running out. The Wall Titans have already made landfall on Marley, and the closest cities are likely destroyed. As we've discussed before with the start of the rumbling, while the distribution of the Titans once they reach the shores of Paradis is a little bit confusing, the rest of their movement is pretty straightforward. Literally, I guess. Gamebreaker on Reddit has made an excellent simulation of the rumbling's timeline based on the manga, and that is also pretty much fully in line with what we see in the show. That being said, it is also very much not. First of all, the anime did change where Fort Salt is, which should accelerate the timeline, and there's also the very simple question of how the hell is anyone actually getting any meaningful estimates of how fast the rumbling is moving? Like, sure, we can sort of gauge that we are slower than it, and this and that, but there is hundreds of thousands of them, and getting an actual meaningful number is just not gonna happen. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I think that's overanalyzing the overanalyzing to an overanalyzing degree, and it's me saying this. I mean, Erwin independently discovered honeypot tactics out of thin air while never having worked in any kind of OPSEC and never even needing to do anything remotely close to that. I think pretty much everything to do with the rumbling timelines is simply there to make the abstract urgency of the rumbling feel slightly more tangible, and that's it. We know that the rumbling will wipe out the Earth as an abstract, so putting a timer on it, which, by the way, pretty much every single story does this to some extent, that's where the you have 24 hours comes from, you know? Like, this is a very, very common plot device, but it just makes the whole thing feel more tangible and more familiar. For the most part, the timeline does add up, and the rumbling should be closing in on Marley right now, so it's not like there is a huge glaring plot hole. But if you really want to tear into the assumptions, well then, yeah, you can start poking pretty significant holes in this. And that is doubly true for the anime, where the midcards are kinda murky in terms of canon because they don't exactly come from the manga. If the Midcard's about the size of the walls is correct, well then the whole idea of parody being Madagascar falls apart. Or we are dealing with a super Earth, which is also upside down, and seasonality doesn't make any sense, at which point we need to completely redo all calculations for basically everything in physics, including gravity itself. And yeah, I don't think Isayama did that, and I don't think it makes sense for us to do that either. So yes, Gamebreaker simulation is very accurate manga-wise and everything intuitively makes sense, but if you really drill down into the details, yeah, I'm sure you can start poking holes in this, and I do think this is just his suspension of disbelief thing. And also, side note, you know how people are jumping around with the ODM gear, they never take fall damage and all this, which obviously makes no sense, right? This is an anime suspension of disbelief. But actually, if the whole, island size is true, that means the planet is bigger, which then means that there is way more gravity, which means it makes even less sense. I find that a little bit funny. But now realizing that thousands, if not millions, are already dying, Magath kicks things up a notch.
Tell us where Jaeger is going with those Titans! Why do you look so damn afraid? I'm not gonna kill you.
We'd see the actual Yelena and Eren scheming scene in the first movie, but obviously remember that Eren also betrayed Yelena, so I think a lot of her actions are also colored by that. Her actual dream of carrying out Zeke's plan is gone, and Eren is the one who killed it. She is a turbo narcissist, so perhaps this entire play alongside the scouts is just her next move. She will make herself indispensable to them, while also getting retribution on Eren and still end up in history books. But what is much more interesting to me is the camera briefly cutting to Gabby, her eyes wide as she watches Magath crush Yelena's arm.
Forgive me, all of you. I had deluded myself into thinking we were the good guys. This war isn't your fault. It's inexcusable.
He apologizes, first to the Paradisians, and then to the warriors. He admits that he was afraid of admitting that his own moral compass had grown just as hollow as the statue of Helos. But importantly, he then says, even so, it is our duty to remember this stupid and bloodstained history. First off, we have seen that he very much has a soft spot for kids and his soldiers in general. Yes, he does fall prey to the same generalizations many of the Marleyan higher-ups do, but time and time again, we see that he does care for them. He listens to cults, he allows them to celebrate their victories, time and time again he is giving the stink eye for all the generals just completely dismissing Reiner's advice, he looks after Gabby and Falco, and so on and so on. And so with this Yelena scene here, much like the last episode where we saw him want to comfort Gabby but simply not having the words to do so, I think her terrified stare just breaks something in him. What justice can he even speak of when this kid looks at him like some kind of maniac? And so finally, with this apology, he tries to be an example to them. Which very neatly leads me on to numero 2. It also directly connects to Gabby's story. Her entire journey has been about seeing and understanding the people on the other side, with her breaking down and explicitly saying, we keep making the same mistakes over and over. Magath might not have heard her words, but this is him saying, it's time we finally learn. Burying this history in rubble will only make it happen again. If there is any hope of giving these children a life worth living, they must know of our mistakes. It is their duty to shoulder the sins of the past and to lead the kids out of the forest for good.
There's no way to avoid spilling more blood today. So, please, look the other way.
I refuse to let someone else stain their hands in my place.
Because this is Overanalyzing, we must ruin the entire pace of the video and insert a needlessly long examination of a minor detail, because this bow right here, kinda crazy. Right up front, let's be realistic. This is anime, so while most of the story and characters are obviously Eurocentric, it will still be colored by Japanese culture. This kind of deep bow is a gesture of utmost respect, sincerity, apology, or any other kind of super strong message. So I think that is the simplest answer here, because in-universe, these kinds of bows are not common at all. On Parody, we saw some subtle bows for Historia, and of course the classic taking a knee, but nothing like this. In Marley, the warrior salute is also very different, and even with Tiber, no one's really bowing. Granted, we don't really see too much politicking, so maybe there are some instances of them bowing, but for the most part, it seems like handshakes and military salutes are infinitely more common than anything resembling a bow like this. Even Hizuru, which is kind of in-universe Japan, they also weren't bowing, so I don't know. In-universe, this bow is such a rarity that I think it speaks to just how sick of all of it he is, and that Magath genuinely wants to do better. And one last thing to mention here with Armin. Obviously, we know that he's not a fighter, and if there is ever an opportunity to avoid bloodshed, he will almost certainly take it. But with this scene right here, I think the wording harkens back to Season 3 and him bloodying his hands to save Jean. There too, Levi told him that they are grateful for what he did. Had he not stained his hands for them, Jean would be dead. Armin already blames himself for everything that has happened with Eren. He blames himself for ever even surviving Shiganshina, and so he just cannot accept Magath's offer. He can never ask someone else to bloody their hands for him. And just to have a little bit of contrast, we cut to Floch, who is cheering about civilization being erased. Which, yes. He tells Atsumobito that she'll be safe and all she has to worry about is contributing to parody. That is until we punch out and see a handful of engineers already executed. Very productive, and I'm sure parody will benefit greatly from this. But thankfully, I don't even need to say anything. Atsumobito says pretty much everything there is to say. She calmly tells him that she hates to interrupt his celebrations, but nothing is going to change. He's going to make their world a little bit smaller, and that's it. They'll still keep killing each other like they always do. This is pretty much word for word what Pixis and Erwin talked about, because, I mean, yeah, that is what people always do. The Scouts already had to dismantle a illegitimate and violent shadow government in Season 3, and the entire prior arc was also basically a civil war. Starting this new era of parody with little wannabe Gigachad who executed his own people is probably not going to end much differently now, is it? Currently, the Jaeger has had a lot of supports, but how long is that even going to last? How well does their messaging hold up when there is no enemy to scapegoat? But mere moments before wannabe Gigachad in Chief pulls the trigger, Armin screams for him, saying the cart is fleeing with the armored and that they need to get the plane airborne.
We can't let them catch up with Eren! We need that flying boat airborne! Why didn't you chase after the cart? If you had, this would be over by now! You know they killed Jean and Oyan Capone, right? This
is another classic Armin play. He knows what buttons he has to press on Floch and the Jaegerists as a whole to make them lock in immediately. If he talks about how the shifters are already pursuing Eren and that this whole plan is in jeopardy, that will obviously take the heat off of them. He includes the information about Jean and Nyankapon that he theoretically shouldn't be aware of, but Floch did see the both of them yoinked, so he lies about them being dead, which in turn gives the whole story way more credence. And at the same time, Connie is already playing his part, and the both of them rush to the dock to force that urgency onto Floch. With the plane, the plan goes perfectly, with Daz and Samuel quickly disarming the explosives. And let's briefly stop right here, because while I think most people don't really notice it, both Daz and Samuel are extremely close to the main cast. Daz was famously vomiting his guts out and was petrified all throughout Trost, while Samuel face-tanked the Colossal and enjoyed the swing set that is an ODM gear hook in your leg. So when Armin mentions that they are friends, these guys really are friends, not just fellow soldiers from a different regiment. They were in the same squad when Trost happened, which was obviously the most formative experience probably for most of their lives. And while we're already yapping, let's jump on over to the Midcard talking about the flying boat, which I refuse to call a flying boat and will keep calling a plane. We touched on this earlier in the video, but the important parts here is that 1, it is fueled by Iceburst Stone, something that can only be found on Parody, and number 2, that Hizuru is the only nation with the technological capacity to make them. So even now, they have a significant strategic advantage over the entire planet with a monopoly on production. Strap on a few upscale Thunder Spears and their tech jumps literally a few decades into the future, while, again, no other nation has neither the technical know-how nor the resources to replicate it. We do know that flight was a very big concern for Marley, and they do obviously have the airships, but like Magath argued, their over-reliance on Titans put them pretty significantly behind the technological curve. Not much is known about the rest of the world, but I do think it's fairly likely that other far-off nations were working on similar things, but still, Hizuru is the first. Seems like a pretty solid tool for future deterrence, but alas. Returning to the episode, Floch uses his noodle for a little bit and realizes that the situation is in fact a little bit sus, which admittedly, big W's for deducing this, but his conclusion is naturally, well then, let's just kill all the hostages. Okay, I know I always clown on him, but I genuinely find this hilarious. This is literally seeing a spider in your house and then actually burning it to the ground along with the rest of the neighborhood for good measure. I mean, the spider's dead, right? You can't really argue with the logic. Completely destroying decades of technology as a precaution, even if it means protecting his great leader, is just wild. But before he can pop off, Atsumobito disarms and overpowers him, with Mikasa then flying in and aura farming for a bit. And with that, it is all-out war yet again. And side note, we get a cool little payoff moment here to Magat's apology, with him now flying the wings of freedom. Both the scouts and he are quote-unquote traitors to their nations. Never in a million years could he have imagined sharing a meal and fighting alongside the island devils who haunted them for thousands of years. That being said though, let's return to the port.
We've got room to raise livestock. You said we'd eat meat together, Connie. Just like we imagined it.
First off, I distinctly remember watching this episode for the first time, and Armin getting bopped like that was just wild. Like, sure, yeah, if I thought about it, I don't think he'd actually die. But then again, it's so abrupt, and this is Isayama. Who the hell knows? Like, at this point, that could be the message. We start fighting each other, and Armin is just shot like that, and it's over. Titans or no Titans, he's just dead. I mean, who knows? I could pretend and tell you, yeah, you Armin was never gonna die. But who knows? And Samuel then, bringing up expanding their lands and raising livestock is obviously a direct reference to Sasha, which is just diabolical. Sasha is dead because of the whole Eren Yeagerist nonsense, so throwing out something like this at Connie is just not cool. And also, let's talk about the animation. No idea if this shot is technically a parallax shot, but it's really cool and a great combo of CG and 2D. Also, certainly overanalyzing, but Reiner's scene here kinda sorta evokes Eren's transformation in Trust. Then again, maybe I'm only saying this because we literally just don't see many other people except Eren transform, let alone with them being the focus. So maybe Reiner looks like Eren because Eren is basically the only point of reference I have. And also, I want to briefly dwell on this shot right here because this is the first ever time we're following a transformation whose aim is exclusively people. Obviously, the Marley Squad in earlier seasons did target the scouts, but they were never a point of view character, and so seeing a transformation like this, where the sky is peppered with other people, just seems weirdly uncanny to me. The closest thing to something like this is Fort Slava, where Reiner too was transforming and targeting basically exclusively people, but still, because that was like an actual war zone, it feels a little bit different than watching this, where we are following the scouts, and now we're seeing Titans come out, and all of them is just against the Jaegerists. That being said, Reiner, I am sorry, but Annie clears your scene 10 times over, because of course she had to do a cool flex by flying through one of the cranes. I don't know why she does it, but it does look very, very cool. And the shot of Floch being completely boxed in by them is just beautiful. The sheer rage, confusion, and terror in his eyes as we see the lightning behind him is so cool. And also, again, is this just like a me thing, or did this happen to literally everyone? Why does Reiner and Annie transforming to help us somehow feel completely normal, and I have to actually remind myself that this is the first ever time I am seeing them fight on our side? The last time we saw Annie fight was, if you were watching as the series came out, a literal decade ago, and she was rampaging scouts. I genuinely don't know why or how this entire transition feels so smooth. We have talked plenty about the gradual tonal transitions we see throughout the series and how our perspective skews between victims and oppressors, so intellectually, I know all of this, but this scene right here still just kinda leaves me stumped. I couldn't really tell you why it works so well. At some point in the series, there was clearly a point at which this would be believable, but imagine telling yourself in Season 1 that a scene like this would exist. You obviously wouldn't believe yourself, but it makes perfect sense. Where did that flip happen?
Violence will always be a part of human existence. Won't it, Captain?
I think this line being placed right as they transform is, again, meant to bonk you over the head that nothing we ever saw in the story was really about the Titans. They were weapons to oppress and to pass on generational trauma and hatred, but they are simply manifestations of human violence and rage. Rumbling or no rumbling, that wouldn't change. Titans or no Titans, that wouldn't change. nations or no nations, that wouldn't change. It's something that we have heard in various contexts all throughout the series, but now witnessing Marleyan Eldians transforming into Titans alongside Paradis Eldians to stop another Paradis Eldian Titan destroying the world, it just kinda puts all of that into perspective. And also, say what you will about CG Titans, but I'm sorry, if you don't think these are literally the coolest Titan shots we get in the entire show, then you need to get your peepers checked. I have had these screenshots saved for I don't know how long, and they are literally just called Reiner Annie Aurafarming.png. The only thing that I do admit is kinda mid, even though it does look really cool, are the wide shots of the Jaegerists surrounding Annie. Something about the overall compositing of the scene makes it look very weird. Like, the water is hyper-detailed, the ground is hyper-detailed, Annie's Titan is somewhere in between, there's a lot of detail, but also kind of not, but the Jaegerists look like PS2 models. In motion, it looks great, and enables movement that they clearly wouldn't have been able to portray otherwise, but slowed down, and especially in individual frames, it looks a little bit uncanny, and something about the lighting, something about the detail, it just looks off. And with that being said, a few more logistical questions. First off, where are they grappling off of? There are a few cranes, and they also use Annie herself as a grappling point, but some of them are building vertical momentum as if they were grappling to, well, thin air. Very, very sus. And conveniently, we never see where those ODM gear hooks land, they just go off screen. Very sus mappa. And more importantly, I demand an extra scene of Annie learning about the Thunder Spears. Realistically, yeah, Armin was probably nerding out about them for months, so maybe it wouldn't be that fun because, like, she had the whole spec sheet, but still, I'd want to hear her take on them considering, well, she would have been dead in a few months if she hadn't went into the cocoon because, like, she has no armor, and if she had eaten a Thunder Spear, it'd be so over. And also, something that is very easy to overlook is that this is actually our first ever time seeing Annie and Reiner fighting side by side. Marley classified Annie as pretty much straight offense, while Reiner was clearly the tank. So I really wish we got to see more of this kind of spear and shield dynamic. Saying it looks really cool sounds kind of messed up because, you know, a bunch of dudes dying, but I love the whole dynamic of Reiner watching her back, only for her to then go hyper-aggressive on the rest of them falling back, rinse and repeat. They really do seem like this well-oiled machine of just pure destruction. And on a similar note, one last thing I want to bring attention to is the music choice. 2 Lives, from all the way back in Season 2 by the way. It is intense and high-octane, but at the same time, there is this somber piano cutting through the action. This is a fight for life and death, but these are their people. It is full of regrets and pain. It is full of questions about how they ever ended up here and why does it always resort to violence.
I don't understand, Connie! We were supposed to be on the same side no matter what!
We still are on the same side, Samuel!
Wait, Connie!
Now that is one hell of a closing scene, but let's deconstruct this. While we do get a flashback to Bertolt and him saying that one of them will have to stain their hands with his blood, what we don't see is their conversation in Shiganshina. That conversation ended with, "You are not devils, I consider all of you friends, but you still have to die." And so, we return to the episode title. Who is the traitor? Reiner, Bertolt, and Annie, the people who started this all? Or is it Armin, Mika, Sakani, and everyone else gunning for Eren? Or is it Eren who betrayed them and the world? Bertolt said they all have to die. Armin said they all have to die. And Eren said they all have to die. There is something uniquely human and uniquely disturbing in the Connie scene. They all made choices along the way. Some big, some small, but none of them ever thought about something like this. How do you end up with a friend crying to another friend while they attempt to kill each other? And with that, that is episode 85. Even though this episode is pretty much just part 1 of the battle, and most of it, including Mika's legendary aura farming, actually happens in the following episode, ending this one on that Connie scream, diabolical. The only big missed opportunity here, I think, was not dragging Connie's scream into the to be continued card, because that just cuts off the scream and that's it, and we're just kind of left, what just happened? But I think if it was dragged into the to be continued card, I think it would hit just a little bit harder, but still, crazy ending to an episode. Also, since you've made it all the way to the end of the video, let me give you a bit of a cheeky insight into what I've been thinking. Because I was wondering, maybe before we get to Dawn of Humanity and obviously the movies, it might be prudent to really recall all the things that led us here, just so we have a clearer idea of how all these things connect, especially facts-wise, and maybe less so with the themes because we've covered the themes a lot. So maybe we'll do a cheeky side quest sometime soon. That's all I'll say for now, because knowing me, I could also just end up scrapping the video and you're just gonna have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. But yes, before we get to the ending, I do think we'll take a quick week off to do a bit of a trip down memory lane, if you will. And you know what else is a crazy trip down memory lane that doesn't even make sense? Yes, this segue to our YouTube members and patrons, who I want to give a massive thank you to. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest member of the team, Artur Babaev, I think. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.